Instead of trying on my wedding dress, I was looking at hospice brochures. It's terrifying to realize the person who gave you life is willing to destroy yours just to keep you on a leash. For months, I walked around with this suffocating grief. I was literally mourning a woman sitting right in front of me. I was ready to cancel my wedding to watch her fade away. To understand this, you gotta understand our dynamic. It was always just the two of us. She called us soulmates, but as I got older, that closeness felt like a tight grip around my throat. If I tried to step out of her shadow, she'd pull the ripcord on a sudden crisis. A health scare, a migraine. I was trained to drop everything and rush to her rescue. Then I met David. He was grounded and he didn't let her manipulate him. For the first time, I felt like I was breathing fresh air. I was falling in love without the guilt. When David proposed, it was the most perfect moment. But when I showed my mom the ring, she just gave it this cold stare. She sighed and said she supposed things were going to change. 2 weeks later, we started planning the wedding. We asked her to tour a botanical garden with us, but she didn't show. I stood in the lobby calling her, feeling that familiar anxiety. When she finally answered, her voice was this fragile whisper. She said she was at the hospital. I completely panicked. We dropped everything and sped to the ER, but she wasn't there. We found her back at her house, sitting in the dark. She was wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the wall. I rushed in, heart pounding, begging to know what was wrong. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes and dropped the bomb. A rare, aggressive neurological condition. No treatment. She had 6 to 8 months to live. My wedding was exactly 7 months away. The timing was a devastating, paralyzing blow. My wedding was exactly 7 months away, and she said she had 6 to 8 months to live. I completely shattered. The next few weeks were a blur of absolute agony. I couldn't eat, and I couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at her, I felt a physical pain in my chest. I immediately stopped all wedding planning. How could I possibly care about floral arrangements when my mom was dying? I told David we had to postpone the wedding indefinitely. David was incredibly supportive at first. He held me while I cried, and he took over all the household chores. He just wanted me to have as much time with her as possible. But as the weeks turned into months, David started noticing things. Just small things at first. Quiet inconsistencies that my grief-blinded eyes were completely missing. First, it was the doctor's appointments. My mom insisted on going to all her specialist visits alone. If I pushed back, she'd burst into tears and accuse me of disrespecting her final wishes. Then it was the medication. I expected to find a bag full of heavy prescriptions. Instead, I found a few generic amber bottles with no labels, just a sticky note that said morning and night. But the biggest red flag was her energy levels. If I brought up David or our future, she'd immediately get weak. She'd clutch her chest and say she didn't have the strength to talk about it. Yet if her friends invited her to brunch, she'd suddenly have a miraculous good day. I once caught her carrying a heavy box of albums by herself. But an hour later, she was too weak to lift her own fork. David gently tried to point these things out to me. He asked why we hadn't seen any official paperwork. I got defensive and yelled at him. I was so scared of losing her. I was willing to fight the man I loved. But the truth has a funny way of demanding to be seen. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was over at her place, making her a cup of tea. She was supposedly resting in the bedroom, too weak to move. She'd left her iPad sitting right there on the kitchen counter. She'd been complaining all morning that her email wasn't syncing right. So I picked it up, just planning to quickly check her settings and fix it. When I unlocked the screen, her email was already open. But it wasn't her inbox that caught my eye. It was a notification banner popping up from her patient portal app. The preview said her recent lab results were ready for review. I completely froze. Just the day before, she told me she was refusing all blood work. She claimed her veins were collapsing and it was just too painful. Without even thinking about it, I tapped the notification. The browser opened straight into her patient portal. She hadn't even logged out. I just stared at the screen, and my hands started to shake. I clicked on the tab for her recent visit notes. The most recent visit was from 3 days ago. That was the exact day she told me she was at an elite neurology clinic getting palliative care. But the doctor's notes were right there in black and white. And they were impossible to misinterpret. It said she was there for a routine annual physical. It literally said, "Patient reports feeling excellent. Blood pressure, normal. Heart rate, normal." It noted she had mild anxiety about her daughter's upcoming marriage. They just recommended a mild anti-anxiety pill. The final blow. All lab results within optimal, healthy ranges. Patient is in excellent health for her age. I completely stopped breathing. It felt like all the air was just sucked right out of the room. I frantically clicked over to her active diagnoses. Mild seasonal allergies, vitamin D deficiency. And that was it. I clicked on her medications. A daily multivitamin. And an over-the-counter allergy pill? There was no neurological condition. There was no systemic failure. There was no 6 to 8 months to live. It was all a lie. A massive, elaborate, sickening lie. I stood in that dark kitchen for what felt like hours. The tea kettle started screaming on the stove, but I couldn't even move to turn it off. The reality of what she'd done just completely washed over me. She watched me cry myself to sleep every night. She watched me waste away from stress and fight with the man I loved. She let me cancel my wedding and throw away my dreams. And the sickest part is, she actually enjoyed it. My grief meant she was the center of attention, and my pain meant she was in total control. She was willing to put me through the psychological torture of watching my own mother die. All just so she wouldn't have to share me. I just closed the iPad. I didn't march in there and confront her, and I didn't scream. For the first time in my entire life, the emotional cord tying me to her just snapped. I wasn't even angry anymore, just completely clear. I realized I was just a pawn in her twisted game of emotional hostage-taking, and I was officially done playing. I walked right out of that house without saying a single word. I got in my car and drove straight to David's place. When David opened his door and saw my face, he instantly knew something was really wrong. I sat him down and just spilled everything. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I took from her portal. I apologized to him over and over, crying until I physically couldn't shed another tear. He didn't say, "I told you so," or get mad. He just held me tight and asked me what I wanted to do next. I could have just called her out right then. I could have sent a massive group text to the whole family exposing her lies. But I knew my mom too well. If I just accused her, she'd find a way to twist it. She'd claim the portal was wrong or suddenly develop some brand new, super dramatic symptom just to get the sympathy back. She absolutely thrived on chaos and arguments. If I fought her head on, I was still playing her game. I needed to end this game permanently. I had to build a boundary so high and solid that she could never climb over it again. And I realized the perfect way to do it was to use her own lie against her. We were originally supposed to have this normal, happy engagement party. But my mom managed to twist it into what she called a living wake. She wanted to gather everyone we knew so she could say her tragic goodbyes while she could still walk. She spent weeks picking out this tragic but elegant dress and writing out a whole speech. Honestly, she was practically buzzing with excitement. She couldn't wait to be the dying star of the evening. I looked at David and told him the party was still happening. But the agenda... Yeah, that was going to change. We were going to let her have her stage, but we were writing the ending. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part flawlessly. I went over there, fluffed her pillows, made her soup, and just listened to her moan about her fading strength. I didn't give her a single hint that I knew the truth. I let her feel like she was totally in control of everything. But behind the scenes, David and I were making calls and printing out a ton of documents. We were putting a very specific, permanent plan into motion. Finally, the night of the party arrived. We rented out this beautiful hall at a local restaurant for about 50 of our closest friends and family. The vibe in the room was incredibly somber, with people whispering and dabbing their eyes. My mom was sitting right in the center of the room in this plush armchair, totally holding court. She looked radiant, honestly, but she kept dabbing her forehead with a lace handkerchief and using this breathy, weak voice. About halfway through the night, she gave my aunt a signal to tap her glass. The entire room just fell dead silent. Everyone turned to look at her, waiting for the tragic guest of honor to speak. She slowly, agonizingly stood up from her chair, leaning super heavily on this wooden cane she bought just for tonight. She was playing the dying matriarch to absolute perfection as she reached for the mic. For 10 straight minutes, she delivered an absolute masterclass in manipulation. She talked about how cruel life was, taking her away right before my wedding. She cried real tears, and the whole audience cried right along with her. When she wrapped up her tearful speech, she wiped her eyes. She looked right at me, expecting me to collapse into her arms. The whole room held its breath, waiting for me to play my part. Instead of breaking down, I calmly walked up to the front. I gave her this gentle, sad smile that completely threw her off. Then I reached out and took the microphone right out of her hand. I looked at the crowd and thanked her for being so brave. I said, watching her suffer made me realize I was being selfish. I just wasn't equipped to give her the care she really needed. Her tragic expression actually faltered for a second. She looked genuinely confused, tilting her head like she couldn't process what I was saying. This was definitely not the script she wrote for tonight. I turned back to our family, keeping my voice totally steady. I reminded them I'm just a daughter, not a doctor. I told them her condition needed strict medical intervention and round-the-clock professional care. Then I slowly turned to look right into her eyes. That brave little smile she was wearing started slipping fast. She could feel herself losing control of the narrative, but she couldn't do a thing about it. I announced that David and I pooled our savings to give her one final gift. I reached down to the podium and pulled out this massive, heavy folder packed with documents. I set it right there for everyone to see. I opened the folder, looked right at her, and delivered the first blow. I told the room we officially canceled the lease on her house to keep her safe. She was moving out at the end of the month. A huge gasp echoed through the whole room. My aunt covered her mouth, and people were staring in total shock. That quiet, mournful vibe instantly shattered into pure disbelief. My mother's eyes went wide with pure panic. She leaned in close, completely dropping the frail act for a second. She hissed under her breath, demanding to know what I was talking about. I completely ignored her. I just looked back out at the crowd and kept going. I explained that since her condition was so advanced, it just wasn't safe for her to live alone anymore. Or drive. So I told them we went ahead and sold her car. I made sure to mention that the money had already been transferred to cover the first 6 months of her new living arrangement. That's when she dropped the cane. It hit the floor so loud, but she didn't even notice. She was standing perfectly straight now. She completely forgot she was supposed to be too weak to stand. She leaned in close again, and that breathy, fragile voice was totally gone. She hissed at me, full of venom, demanding that I stop right now. I didn't even blink. I just kept my voice totally calm and moved on to the next item. I told the room I'd also spoken to the management at her country club. I let them know about her terminal status, and they were so gracious to refund her annual membership fee. I mean, obviously she couldn't be playing tennis or going to brunches in her condition, right? Then I reached back into the folder and pulled out a glossy brochure. I held it right up so everyone in the back could see it clearly. I announced we'd secured her a bed at an assisted living facility. I made sure to highlight the lockdown memory care wing, the strict diet, and the absolute zero visitor policy without my approval. It was for her own protection, of course. I turned back to look at her and gave her the biggest, sweetest smile I could muster. I looked her dead in the eyes and told her she was moving in on Monday. The silence in that room was deafening. Nobody even breathed. She just stared at me in sheer, unadulterated horror. I had taken her own lie, and I used it to build a cage she couldn't escape. Her fragile little act completely shattered. She let out this guttural shriek. She lunged right at me and grabbed my arm with this iron grip. She was screaming that I couldn't do this to her. I didn't even try to pull away. I just played dumb and spoke right into the mic so the whole room could hear. I threw her own words right back in her face. I told her that her organs were failing and she needed this to stay safe. And that's when the trap snapped shut. She was so desperate to keep control that she just lost it. She screamed at the top of her lungs that she wasn't dying. The words just ripped out of her throat before she could stop them. Those words just hung there in the air. You could hear the echo bouncing off the walls of the hall. She froze. You could see the exact second she realized what she'd just confessed. 50 of our closest friends and family were just staring at her. She looked around the room, desperately searching for someone to save her. But all she saw was pure shock. People were covering their mouths in total disbelief. The disgust radiating from the crowd was just palpable. These were the same people she'd just spent 10 minutes crying to. Someone in the front row demanded to know what she meant. My mother started stammering. She physically backed away from the podium, looking for a way out. She tried to backtrack, claiming she just meant she was fighting it. She tried to say she was miraculously getting better. I dropped the fake sweet act right then and there. I looked her dead in the eye. My voice was completely flat and cold. I told her in front of everyone that she wasn't getting better. I just cut off her frantic little excuses. I didn't even break eye contact. I opened up that thick folder on the podium and pulled out a stack of papers. I held them up for the whole room to see. I announced that these were her official medical records. The exact ones she'd carelessly left open on her iPad.
I read the summary out loud to a dead silent room.
I detailed her absolutely perfect health and her optimal lab results. I made sure to mention the doctor's note about her mild anxiety over my wedding. It was all right there in black and white. I told the crowd I'd made plenty of copies for everyone. With this final, dismissive gesture, I set the stack of records right on the edge of the stage. I invited anyone who wanted to read about her miraculous recovery to come take one. The undeniable proof of her massive lie was just sitting there, right out in the open. There was nowhere left for her to hide. My mother's face went completely white. She looked at the papers, then at the crowd, and finally at me. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the fake fear she used to control me, but the raw terror of a manipulator whose mask just got ripped off. She whimpered and reached out for me. She was literally begging me to stop. Her whole theatrical act just crumbled into genuine panic. She realized she had completely lost control of the game. I stepped back, totally out of her reach. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I just felt beautifully empty of her. I told her quietly that the wedding was back on, but she wouldn't be there. And I told her to never call me again. I turned around and walked right off that stage. The room behind me was erupting into total chaos. Family members were shouting and demanding answers. But I didn't look back once. I just kept walking. David was waiting for me at the back of the room. He took my hand, steady as always. We walked out the doors and into the cool night air, leaving all that madness behind us forever. We didn't wait 7 months to get married. 3 weeks later, we went to the courthouse with 2 close friends. It was simple, quiet, and completely drama-free. It was exactly what a marriage should be. Built on truth, not manipulation. The fallout was catastrophic for my mother. Once the family read those notes, her support system evaporated. She tried to claim I forged the documents to make her look crazy. But the lie was too big, and the evidence was undeniable. She was left completely alone. I changed my number the next day. I moved in with David, and eventually we bought a house in a different state.
I haven't spoken to her since that night.
And honestly, I never will. People ask if I feel guilty for walking away from my only parent, or if I worry about when she actually gets sick. I don't. Someone who truly loves you won't force you to choose between their happiness and your life. Setting boundaries is hard, but the peace is worth it. I spent the day I was supposed to be wedding dress shopping looking at hospice brochures. I finally realized I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the mother I deserved, but never had. Letting go of that illusion was the moment my real life began. People still ask me about it. They want to know if I feel guilty for walking away from my only parent. I worry about her getting sick for real one day. The honest truth is, I don't. I learned the hardest lesson a daughter can ever learn. Someone who actually loves you won't force you to choose between their happiness and your own life. Setting boundaries isn't always pretty. Sometimes it means letting someone face the ugly consequences of their own actions. Sometimes you gotta walk away from the only family you've ever known. But the peace that comes after, it's hard to even describe. The absolute quiet of a life that belongs only to you. It's worth every single step. I think back to the day I was supposed to be trying on my wedding dress. Instead, I was sitting there looking at hospice brochures, just like she wanted. It took me a really long time to realize something important. The person I was truly mourning back then, it wasn't her. I was mourning the mother I deserved, the one I never actually had. And that's a heavy thing to carry around. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Letting go of that illusion was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the most necessary. Because the moment I finally let it go, that was the exact moment my real life finally began. A life built on truth, not manipulation. I finally have a life that's entirely mine.
And I'm never giving it back.
Not for her, not for anyone. This is just the beginning.